Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and I am so excited to have Lee Weinstein with us today. He's an MIT grad. He's taught at MIT. He's been awarded over 30 patents. He's a patent agent. He's invented laser tag, if you can believe it. He's done over 10,000 hours of volunteering. He runs a small medical device company, which makes, among other things, one of his inventions, which allows people to eliminate TMJ by training themselves out of clenching their teeth in their sleep. It's called Sleep Guard. And I'm just so excited to have you on the show today, Lee.
Thank you. I feel glad to be here, and I'm happy to talk about those things, but there's something that I'd like to talk about first that I think might resonate with your people, and that is the most important and simple things that you can do to stay safe from coronavirus.
That would be great. Yeah, it's very very timely and important. So please do.
And the reason that that's important to me is I have three people in my life who would be very likely not to make it if they caught that disease. And so even though I would be likely to survive if I caught it, I don't want to catch it and give it to one of them. And it's led me down some interesting paths. And one of the things I want to share with you today is I read all these articles about people testing different kinds of masks and stuff like that. And it was evident to me from the very beginning of the pandemic, when you remember when people were getting sick on the Diamond Princess, when it was moored at its dock, people had been closed in their rooms for weeks and they were still getting sick. New people were getting sick. And the only reason that I could see that could possibly happen is the way the air circulation system works on the ship, and that air was moving from one compartment to the next, and people were getting sick from that. So I started reading articles on particulates that come out of people's mouths when they talk or sing or whatever, and all the research actually had been done years ago. All the numbers were out there. And so then when I was looking at masks and I couldn't get the data that I wanted off of people who were testing it, I went out and I bought this, which is a little, it's beeping at me because I left it on. It's a little $6,000 box that's used primarily in clean rooms in semiconductor facilities, but it counts particles. And if you look at let's see if maybe you can see on the display of it there, it classifies them into 0.3 micron size, 0.5 micron size, 1 micron size, 2.5, 5, and 10. And the smallest one, the 0.3, is the class that the coronavirus particle would be in. And that's the filtration. That's the number for which people want to know the filtration efficiency of masks. So I made myself a little adapter, which I'll show you here, which can get clamped onto a mask. And then this goes to the particle counter. This gets clamped with a clamp so that I know that I'm drawing air only through the mask and nothing is leaking around it. And then I tested all kind of stuff. And then I did another set of tests, which I'm not done with yet, which is using mannequin heads, figuring out, given a certain kind of mask, how much air is going through it and how much is actually going around it, because it doesn't seal well to your face. Because those numbers really matter too. But in the end, I'll tell you the result is there's anything close to an N95 mask. It keeps you hundreds of times as safe as any of the other kinds of designs that are out there. So then I went out and I started buying from different retail outlets and commercial safety outlets and stuff, masks that were supposed to be N95 or KN95, which is the Chinese equivalent, and testing them. And I found that 30% of them are fake.
Wow.
So I tested one from Staples. It was the main one that Staples was selling that was supposedly KN95. And those N95 and KN95, the 95 in them means that it supposedly filters out 95% or more of those 0.3 micron particles, which are the hardest ones to get and the hardest ones to filter out. And I found that the masks that Staples was selling was only filtering out about 30%, which is about the same as 2 layers of a cotton t-shirt. And so I contacted their chief counsel and I sent them a lab report, and they did not take the things off the market.
Wow.
So it's kind of sad to me that there isn't more being published on this in the mainstream press. I contacted the Washington Post. I had a whole article that I thought they could publish on fake masks and stuff like that. And what they told me was, well, unless you find a mask that's on the FDA's emergency use authorization list and you find that mask being faked, we're not going to publish it. And I said, wait a minute. The public isn't going out and checking that list, right? The public's going to stores and they're buying something that says N95, that says KN95. It's the public that I'm trying to protect. You know, the hospitals, which are going to look at that list, can afford to have a lab at MIT or some other place like that test these things for them. And they do. You know, when that plane load of N95 masks got flown to Massachusetts on the Crafts plane, they sent a box of them over to MIT to have them tested there to make sure they were good enough to use at Mass General Hospital. And they were. And so, you know, then the FDA gave the emergency use authorization and everything went through. But anyway, so to me, one thing that people might want to know is that I have not yet found any 3M product being faked. And the 3M KN95 and N95 masks are fantastically good. They're supposed to filter out 95% of particles, but they actually filter out about 99.9% of particles. They're like 100 times better than they need to be. And they're now available a lot of places too. So I don't know if Amazon has any 3Ms on them, but places like discountsafetygear.com has 3M back in stock now. And so for people who care, you know, that's the thing to keep you safe. You can go to as many dangerous biker parties and, you know, drinking events and whatever, and there can be coronavirus in the air all around you. If you're wearing that thing, you're okay.
Yeah, as long as you wear it correctly, though. If you wear it wrong, you don't have a good seal, then you'll just be drawing the coronavirus air right into your lungs.
Very, very true. And, you know, the key thing is the nose bridge shaper. You know, you want to bend that thing. It's usually a piece of aluminum. On the really cheap things, it's a little steel wire. But on the N95 and KN95 masks, it's usually a strip of aluminum. And if you monkey with it a little bit until, if you take a deep breath and you breathe out quickly and you don't feel any air going anywhere on your skin, you're good.
Yeah. I recommend people who are serious about this watch a video showing correct placement and just kind of how to wear it, how to put it on, how to take it off. It's a very deliberate way that you put it on and you take it off.
Yep.
It's been
that is a great idea.
For somebody who's used to just wearing a surgical mask, what do you tell that person? Because the N95 mask is maybe awkward, difficult to wear, or they don't breathe as well with it or as easily. Maybe it feels too hot or
well, you know, so I have a surgical mask here and if I put this thing on, you know, and then I shape it to my nose, when I breathe through this thing, really, like a large percentage of my breath winds up coming out backwards here at the edges. So no matter how well you seal this to your face, you're mostly not breathing through it. And I don't think people realize that. If you take this thing and you seal it to your lips, and try and breathe through it, you'll feel like you're being asphyxiated. You can hardly get any air to move through this thing. And it's a very good filter. It's about 85% efficient at pulling out coronavirus particles. But most of the air that you're breathing when you wear one of these things is not going through it.
Right.
And the reason that it's not difficult to breathe with this on is because the air isn't going through it. And so now, in terms of it preventing outgoing particles, it's probably still pretty good, because when the respiratory droplets come out of your throat as you're breathing, they're usually somewhere between 2 and 5 microns in diameter, which is 20 to 50 times the diameter of a coronavirus particle. And maybe in one of those droplets there's a coronavirus particle. Occasionally there would be, and that's why it's dangerous to be around somebody who's talking or singing, especially singing, who's got coronavirus and they may not even know it. And the level of coronavirus in somebody's lungs and in the saliva goes as high as 100 million particles per cubic centimeter. So
wow,
it's not that unusual that one of these tiny little particles would have a coronavirus particle in it for somebody who's sick at that level. Well, when you're breathing out, a particle as big as 2 to 5 microns is very easy to catch, whether it's in a cotton mask or whether it just bumps into the surface of this thing and sticks. And remember, it's liquid now. So if it does touch a surface like the inner surface of this, it won't bounce off like a piece of dust might. It'll stick. So any mask is pretty good at stopping the outgoing. But if you're trying to protect yourself, if you're going into an environment where some people are not wearing masks, or you're going into an environment, let's suppose you live in a state where it's not mandatory for the bars to be closed right now. And on and off, that's changing in different states. I don't know whether it's currently legal or illegal for bars to be open, for instance, in Texas, because it's been changing a lot. But suppose you wanted to go out drinking with your friends, and suppose you actually wanted to stay safe. If you wore an N95 mask, then there could be tons of coronavirus in the bar where you're at, where everybody's yelling really loud, and so there's lots of particles coming out of people's mouths. And if the only time you don't have your mask on is when you take a sip of your drink, you lift up your mask and you take a sip of your drink or whatever, and then you put it back, your chance of catching coronavirus is about zero. It's because you're doing a really good, simple protocol. Now, if you're worried about looking like a dork, okay, well, you can trade off your concerns of looking like a dork versus your concerns of staying alive or your concerns of your friends staying alive. That's up to you. But the point is that you can, even in a really dangerous environment like that, with an N95 mask on, you can stay safe. But with wearing a mask like this, if everybody else is wearing a mask, then yes, it will catch the particles on the way out. But if there are some people not wearing masks and they're sick, this thing is not going to protect you from catching the virus, because when you're breathing in, at that point, that 2 to 5 micron droplet of water has evaporated. It actually evaporates by the time the particle travels a few inches away from your face, it evaporates really fast. In fact, if you want to see how fast it evaporates, you ever watch one of those ultrasonic humidifiers, the cool mist humidifiers,
No.
where the little mist comes out of the thing? Well, the mist makes it about this far before it disappears into the air.
Yeah.
And those are the same size droplets caused by the same physics effect as when you breathe. It's millions of times as many of them coming out of one of these humidifiers, but so that you can see them. But when somebody is singing, yelling, talking, whatever, those particles are liquid for about this far away from their face.
About
And then,
about a foot then.
or less. And then they're down to whatever was dissolved in that droplet, which is, let's say, the coronavirus particle, which is much smaller. So,
got it.
Well, maybe enough of that, unless you think there's something else that people would want to know about that.
So I have a couple quick questions
Sure.
about this. I've heard that N95 masks, NKN95, they don't really protect the people that are around you like a surgical mask does, because there's a vent that has no outgoing filter. So your exhalation just goes straight into the environment.
Yeah, that's a pretty serious misunderstanding, although the theory behind it is right. So let's suppose we take a mask, like I'm going to show you about the best N95 mask on the market is these ones that used to be sold for contractors. This is a 3M mask, and it has the valve that you're talking about. But when I put this on my face, I'm not going to shape this one right now, but when I seal it to my face, the valve does take some of the outflow, but it doesn't actually take the majority of it. It takes a little bit of pressure to open the valve. And at that pressure level, about 25% of the air is going out the valve, and about 75% is going through the filter material. And whereas if you look at one of these, when it's on your face, I haven't measured it yet, but I've estimated it. It's probably even worse. That I think that more than 50% of the air, when you breathe out, just gets diverted and goes backwards.
With a surgical mask, yeah.
Yeah, with a surgical mask. So the N95 protects the people around you more than the surgical mask does. And you're right, if it has a vent in it, it doesn't protect people perfectly. But there are plenty of N95 masks that don't have a vent. And those are pretty much close to 100% filtration in both directions. So that would be the best thing if you want to protect everybody else. But the other thing you can do is you can take a regular N95 mask that has a vent, like that one, and if you want to be really good to everyone else and awesome to yourself, then you can take and glue a little square of cotton over the vent on the inside. And now you'll get filtration of the large particles coming out of your mouth before the air goes out the vent.
Got it.
And then you'll have the best of both worlds. You'll have the cooler operation, lower breath out pressure, which is what those vents were designed to provide. So that, those vented masks were originally made for people who are working in the trades, not for like hospital operating rooms. And by far the largest quantity of N95 masks prior to the pandemic was not going to medical people. This statement in the that you see commonly in the press, N95 masks are for healthcare workers. No, N95 masks were mostly for carpenters, machinists, people working around asbestos, stuff like that, who were in particulate environments that would compromise their health if they weren't wearing a good mask.
Yeah, construction workers.
It's relatively rare that a surgeon would have been wearing an N95 mask. They'd usually wear one of those surgical masks. The only time somebody in a medical situation would have been wearing an N95 mask would be if they knew they were going into work in an area where there was Ebola or something like that. Then, yeah, definitely they would be. But it wasn't common equipment, that people would use in hospitals. You would have never seen one around, 2 years ago. They were there for when they were needed, but they weren't commonly used.
Yep.
So those vents were put in because when you're a tradesperson and you're on a job site, and you're carrying lumber and you're sawing wood or you're doing whatever, you're working up a sweat. You're breathing much harder than a surgeon is breathing while he's doing his little thing, doing an operation. So those vents were to help the mask, the fibers of the mask not get saturated with water from people breathing out, which makes it even harder to breathe, and to just make the whole breathing process a little easier. And they do. So you said you had other questions too?
Yeah,
I hope I answered that one.
Yeah, that was great. That was great. So you see a lot of misinformation on Facebook about mask wearing, about whether it works or whether it's become very political, which is just bizarre to me. But one of the statements that you see circulating on Facebook is that little kids or just older people will die from like asphyxiation or having poor breathing. Their breathing is compromised by wearing a mask all day long. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's anywhere close to true. I mean, I've worn an N95 mask for 8-10 hours in a row a couple of times when I was out doing stuff in public where I didn't want to be taking it on and putting it on and taking it off. It's just easier to leave it on. And after a few minutes, I don't even notice that I have the thing on. And it's a little bit different how to breathe through it, but not a lot. I mean, they're designed to be very good. The ones that are really hard to breathe through, if you buy one of these masks that gets fitted with a PM 2.5 filter, I think I've got some of them here somewhere, but I don't see them right now. It's one of those masks where there's an insert pouch, and you put a filter in there. A PM 2.5 filter is a fibrous filter that's meant to catch particles down to 2.5 microns. But it's an ordinary filter, meaning it's just fibers. An N95 mask or a KN95 mask is not an ordinary filter. People maybe they don't know, maybe they don't care, I don't know, about how it works. But for down to a few microns, it catches particles like a screen would, where there are holes through the filter, right? And if the particle is bigger than that hole, it can't make it through the hole. That's the way I think most people think that filters work. And before I learned what a HEPA filter was, that's the way I thought all filters worked.
Right.
A HEPA filter, which stands for high efficiency particle arresting filter, works is that for big particles, it catches them because they won't fit through the holes. But for small particles, let's say there's a fiber and it's maybe as big around as this peanut jar, and there's this particle that's going to come near it, but the fiber itself is charged. It has electric charges embedded in it. And when this particle starts to come near it and is going to go past it, it gets pulled over to the fiber and it sticks. Even though the hole here is really big compared to that tiny particle, it doesn't go through the hole because it sticks. The way you could think of it is, it's like if I put up a matrix of metal rods and I tried to throw a magnet through the holes, I wouldn't be able to, because as the magnet gets near the rods, it gets pulled over to one of the rods and it sticks. Well, that's a magnetic force, but with an electric force, it's the same with a particle. So these particles come into the HEPA filter, and even though the HEPA filter has space to allow them through, the fact that the fibers of the HEPA filter are highly charged, they pull the particle over and it sticks. So the really amazing thing about a HEPA filter is it's 100% efficient for big particles they can't fit through. And for really, really tiny particles, it's close to 100% efficient because they almost always get attracted over to a fiber and stick. And for an in-between size of particle, it has a minimum point in its efficiency. And that minimum point is at 0.3 microns, which is why this thing has a counter bin for 0.3 microns, is because that's actually the hardest size to pull out. Coronavirus-sized particle, 1 micron, is much easier for a HEPA filter to grab than a 0.3 micron. So when this thing says that a when this counter says that a N95 mask is 99.99 or 99.92% efficient, for a coronavirus particle, it's more like 99.995% efficient, because those are smaller. And fortunately, for things like asbestos particles that are a hundredth of a micron or something like that, an N95 mask or a KN95 mask, because it's a charged matrix filter, that's a different kind of filter than just a fabric filter. They're almost 100% efficient as you get down to the really, really tiny things, which are the ones that can go right through the walls of your lungs and straight into your bloodstream. So if you're out in a city that's got really bad pollution, like Mexico City or something like that, and you wear an N95 mask, you're going to be 100 times as healthy as if you're, just breathing in the junk.
Yeah.
So,
but you don't need to wear a mask if there's nobody near you, right? I see people
from the coronavirus point of view, yeah. Although there were some interesting studies done. So, like for bicyclists, like my buddy Phil rides in all these bicycling events here in Massachusetts. We have a giant cancer research fundraiser every summer called the Pan Mass Challenge that raises about $50 million a year for cancer research. And it's thousands of men and women riding a 200-mile course over a period of 2 days from like central Massachusetts all the way out to the end of Cape Cod. And then there's a big party at the end. And I usually volunteer at the party, so I know about the party. And I've never ridden in the race. But so they were looking at whether to hold the Pan Mass Challenge this summer. And there were two main issues. One was, would the cyclists be safe while they were cycling? And two was, could they hold the party at the end? And it actually turned out that the party at the end was safer than the cycling. Even though the cyclists were pretty far apart, they have when you're cycling, you have a slipstream of air, right? And it's going back. The person that's behind you is moving right through the air that you just breathed out, and it hasn't had time to spread out or go anywhere.
I see.
So there was this group, I think at Oxford in England, that did a computer simulation of people cycling at different speeds and breathing and the particle counts and stuff like that. And it turned out to be not in the least bit safe. So whereas if you're hiking with somebody and you're like next to them and there's breeze blowing and all that kind of stuff, there's actually a long time between when a particle comes out of someone's mouth and when you would breathe it in, and it's dispersed by then. But if you're cycling in a pack, not so. So it depends on the activity.
Got it. Okay. All right. A few more quick questions on this, and then we'll move on. Face shields. Any value to having that on? I've seen like dentists or dental technicians wearing a mask and then a face shield on top of that. Is that extra valuable, extra safe? Or?
Where somebody could cough or sneeze on them. And if that happens, you get this momentary burst of a huge amount of projectile stuff that could potentially have virus in it. So if I was a medical worker working close to someone's face, I would wear a face shield. And it's not because it's useful 99.9% of the time. It's because in that very rare case where somebody just go, you're a dentist, you're leaning over somebody and they go like that. You don't have a face shield on, you're thousands of times less safe because those projectile particles can go right into your eyes. And whereas a normal, like if you look at what the air does like if I'm walking through a supermarket, right? And let's suppose there's coronavirus particles in the air in the supermarket. There probably are. Not very many, but so one of my friends asked me near the beginning of the pandemic, do I need to wear a face shield when I go to the supermarket as well as a mask. And I thought, how do I calculate this? What's the right way to look at it? I said, oh, okay. You've seen somebody take a drag on a cigarette and then breathe out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those cigarette smoke particles are about 1 micron sized particles. So they're well, actually 0.2 to 1 micron. So they're in this range of size. Well, when somebody takes a drag on a cigarette and then they breathe out, lots of smoke comes out of their mouth, right?
Right.
Well, why didn't it all stay in their lungs? And the answer is, you breathe in, let's say that here's this little alveoli sac, and some air comes in here, and some oxygen atoms diffuse into the walls of this thing and go into your bloodstream, and then the sac contracts and it pushes most of that air back out. Well, most of the particles were just staying suspended in that little volume. So something like between 10% and 50% of the smoke particles stay in your lungs and the rest come back out. Well, same when you breathe in air that has coronavirus particles, most of them don't land. Most of them come back out. But maybe 10% of them land in your lungs. So when you're looking at face shield issue, most of the surface area of your lungs is, I think, about 5 square meters. It's big. So it's all wrinkled up, in there, but it's big. And so you've got air drifting by this 5 square meter thing, and maybe 10% of the time one of the particles sticks. Well, your eyes are only like a square centimeter, right? So that's a tiny fraction of the 5 square meters. So as you're walking around in the store, the chance of a coronavirus particle landing in your lungs is very high compared to the chance of one landing on your eye. And even if you're wearing an N95 mask, where you've reduced the chance of one landing in your lungs by somewhere between, let's say, a factor of 100 and a factor of 1,000, mm-hmm. Even then, the chance is still higher that one will land in your lungs than it will land in your eye. But if somebody coughs in your face, that completely reverses, because the particles that they cough in your face act like little bullets. They won't come at you and then go around your eye the way that airflow would if you're walking through a supermarket. They'll just, from their own momentum, go right into your eye.
Got it.
So the probability, if somebody coughs in your face and they have coronavirus, the probability that you will get coronavirus is almost 100% if any of those particles land in your eye. So in that case, a face shield is a very good idea. But if someone is not going to get a chance to cough in your face, so you're not going to get any chance of these large projectile particles hitting you, then the face shield is pointless.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. So this brings up a question around viral load, because if someone coughs right in your face and they're very sick and they have lots of the virus, that doesn't bode well for you. Whereas if they're asymptomatic, they don't have much viral load themselves, and then they don't cough out a lot of virus, and you're just walking through it in a supermarket, the viral load, the exposure will be quite low, and the likelihood of you getting quite sick from it will be lower, is my understanding. Is that correct?
Yes, and there are two issues. So viral, just to get the terminology so that we're using the same words for things, viral load is the concentration in the person's body who has the virus.
Yeah.
And viral dose is the amount that they hit you with at the initial thing.
Yep, good distinction, yep.
There's an interesting correlation. It was in a New York Times article, although not focused on. It is known for other coronavirus viruses other than SARS-CoV-2. It's known that the higher the dose you initially get, the worse your symptoms will be, because the exponential rise in your body will start at a higher point. And so the first couple days of that rise, where your immune system usually has a chance to balance out and get on track in this, suddenly it gets a big step function increase, and it overshoots. And so your chance of getting a cytokine storm, that where your immune system actually eats you alive, literally, is much higher if you get a higher initial dose. That's known for other viruses. Now, nobody's ever going to do the experiment with SARS-CoV-2 because too many people would die during the experiment. But I think it's safe to assume that the higher viral dose initially leads to a higher chance of death. Now, there's a bunch of articles that have been published about couples where one couple, let's say, worked in a hospital or worked as a sanitation worker or some job that put them at risk, and they got sick, and then their spouse got sick, and their spouse died, but they didn't die. So the way I think about that is that probably what happens there is somebody gets sick in their work environment, their viral load is building up, and maybe, I don't know how often the average couple kisses each other, but if you're working long shifts and stuff at a hospital, it wouldn't be unusual to go a couple of days without kissing your partner. Well, if you're building up that load in your body, you get a low initial dose, but you build up to a higher load, and then you finally have some time to spend with your partner and you kiss. The initial dose you give them might be 1,000 times as high as the initial dose you got.
Got it.
So you don't even know you have it yet, but now, and it's not at a terrible level in you yet, but it's at a high enough level that when you give it to them, their immune system doesn't have time to figure it out before it gets to such a level in them that it kills them. So I wrote a little paper on that. I put it online for my friends, and the way I coined this little thing that you could say to your partner is, let's make out so we don't kill each other. Like this double meaning to that, so I kind of liked it. But that if you're in a partnership where one of you has the chance of being exposed regularly, like my friend Harry, his wife Kathy, right now, she's working in a public school system. And so every day she's got a much higher risk than he does. And I told him, you guys should kiss every time she comes home, because if you are both going to get it, you want to both get it at the same level. You don't want one of you to accidentally transmit it at an initially much higher dose level.
Yeah, mega dose. Yeah. Makes sense. Okay, another question that comes to my mind around devices that protect you. There are these negative ion kind of ionizers that you wear around your neck. It's like a personal air purifier. Air tamer is an example of that. People on airplanes will wear it. It doesn't make any noise. It doesn't have a fan or motor in it, I don't think, but it just ionizes the air around you and forces the particles away so that it helps keep you from getting sick. What's your take on that?
Well, ionizing air doesn't actually, quote, force particles away. There is a kind of filter system, like if you, back before smoking was banned in most restaurants and bars and stuff, if you went into a bar, you would see one of these smoke eater machines on the ceiling. And what it is as the air gets drawn into it, there are these high voltage wires. There may be a centimeter apart, maybe a stack of them a foot or more tall. And as the air passes by those high voltage wires, it gets ionized, just like you just said, for these little personal purifier ones. And what that does is very quickly a charge will land on, like, every dust particle, smoke particle, anything that goes in there gets charged. And then after it goes past the wires, it goes between a set of metal plates. There's this sandwich of maybe 20 parallel metal plates. Like if you look at the back of an air conditioner, you know where the heat exchanger is, or you look at the front of an air conditioner, it's a lot of parallel metal plates. Well, these are further apart, and the wires sit right in between them. So the wire ionizes air and transfers charge to particles. And then the particles are moving in, and they get attracted over to the metal, and they stick, and they just stay there. And if you run one of those things in a smoky room for 100 hours, and then you pull the metal plates out, they're all covered with this tarry, gunky substance, and you can wash them in a dishwasher. And that's all the smoke particles that they pulled out of the air. So my question with the personal ionizers, and I don't totally know the answer to your question, is after you charge the particles, does that actually make them any less likely to wind up in you? And I'm not sure that the answer is yes, because there's no obvious place that they're getting attracted to, like metal plates. Those metal plates are a very necessary part of that equation. Now, if somebody made an air purifier that was an air ionizer and then a bunch of thin metal plates that was all built into a mask, that would work, but it would be bulky and it'd be a pain in the ass. But if you're just wearing this thing around your neck and it's just ionizing air that's near you, it's not obvious to me that that should be a win. There's nothing that's going to push the particles away from you any more than anything that's going to attract them to you, because you don't know what your charge is versus the particles. Now, if the necklace that you're wearing, if it's connected to your skin, and I guess maybe it has to be, so that's one end of the circuit, and then it's spewing things off. So actually, no, it would go the other way, is the particles would be attracted to you, because the way that the ionizer is creating the ions is it's transferring electrons from somewhere out into the air. Well, where's it getting the electrons? Well, you're the one wearing it, so it's getting the electrons from you. So what it's doing is it's positively charging you.
Well, it doesn't actually charge from your skin, because you're not wearing it on the surface of your skin. You're wearing it like halfway down your chest over your clothes. And
well, somehow, if it's doing what it says it's doing, which is if it's ionizing the air, it's either ionizing it in both directions, so it's creating positive and negative ions, and then they can just recombine, so there isn't much point. Or it has a ground reference to your body somehow, in which case it can create purely negative ions out there or purely positive ions and charge you the opposite way. One way or another, those ions have to balance. So if it's creating both in the air, that's pretty useless, because they're just going to recombine. If it's only creating one, like negative ions, like these ionizers that you'll see in your home, that's useful because they won't recombine to something. But then the question is, what's the other side of that circuit? For the home ones, it's the wall plug. It's the ground in your wall plug. So for the home ones that are creating negative ions, it's pumping positive charge into the ground of your wall plug. And if it's a wearable one and it really works and it is creating negative ions, it has to be pumping positive charge into you. Now, that's not that hard to do. It could even do it through your clothing. It's not going to be that impossible to do. But provided it is doing that, then you're positively charged and the air is negatively charged, and now those particles are actually attracted to you, not repelled away. So that's the trick. And I haven't measured one, so I don't know which of those it's doing, but it has to be one of those two.
Okay. Well, I'd be interested to hear, once you've had a look at something like the Air Tamer, what you see as the value or lack thereof of it. But let's move on to other topics. I'd love to
Well,
hear.
there's one more thing I want to cover just quickly, and that's ultraviolet.
Okay.
So there's a lot of UV lamps out there, and people are saying, "Oh, buy this UVC lamp because UVC kills coronavirus." Well, UVC also kills all the cells in your retina. So UVC is the thing that would give you eye cancer. If you were looking at the sun. Although there's only a very small amount of it coming from the sun, the UVC, because it doesn't make it through the atmosphere. But anyway, UVC lamps are out there, and they have the potential to be extremely dangerous. Like if you look at the professional ones and you look at the warning sheets that come with them, one of them that I bought because I built a UV sterilizer for some of my products, because I make medical products. And now in the time of coronavirus, I ultraviolet sterilize everything before I ship it. Well, on the lamp, it says, caution, looking at this lamp for 1 second can cause you eye cancer within a year. So just a caution for people.
Yeah. Wow.
On to the next topic.
That is scary. Okay, so let's talk about some of the medical products, including the Sleep Guard. Like, what's the science behind it? Why does it work? Why do people need it? The Sleep Guard in particular, which is how I found out about you, was when I was doing research for an article I wrote for lifehack.org about sleep technologies, and yours was one of the really cool ones because I grind at night and clench at night, and especially since I've been wearing a retainer since I had about a decade ago. I had
that gives you something to chew
orthodontal
on,
work.
so you might
Yeah.
bite even more. Yep. So when somebody clenches at night, they do it because it gives a soothing feeling, and your mind will just happen upon it. And for some people, it becomes very addictive. And some people have much more regular tense dreams than others. So if you look at somebody who has a background of trauma, especially childhood trauma, or if you look at somebody who's been through a recent physical or mental trauma, it could be that they got divorced, it could be that they had a skiing accident, it could be that they went through surgery, but something where they were helpless in one way or another, we'll say that that's central to trauma. And that shows up in their dreams. So clenching brings a kind of a soothing feeling during sleep that's similar to the soothing feeling I guess kids get from sucking their thumb. And to your subconscious, it seems like it's helping you because it's giving that soothing feeling when you're having that troubling dream. It doesn't know that when you wake up in the morning, you're going to be in pain. And so, it only senses the instantaneous. And the second unfortunate thing of nature that has people clench is that when you're asleep, the neurotransmitter balance in your brain changes, and something that would have been painful in your mouth, like people who clench a lot, they might even have a hard time chewing when they're awake because their teeth hurt. But that pain, when they bite, doesn't exist when they're asleep. Those pain transmitters don't work when they're asleep. So nature is hiding the pain and giving you soothing feeling when you clench, when you're asleep. And that's like the killer combination. So that's what builds up the habit. So the idea behind the Sleep Guard headband, which I hadn't had the forethought to have one sitting here on my desk with the actual electronic module on it, but I do have one of the cloth pieces. So this headband here is what the module would be mounted here in the center, in the front, the electronic module. And it picks up signals from your muscles here at your temporalis muscles. So if I'm sitting here and I put my fingers against my temples and I bite, I'll feel muscle fibers move under the skin. So all that the biofeedback headband is doing is it's sensing the electrical signals from these muscles. That tells it that you're clenching. And then it makes a quiet beeping sound, like ee. Not to startle you. It starts off very quietly. And the whole point of it is for you to be able to create a different part of your subconscious that hears that sound as a signal that you're hurting yourself. And that you train that part of your subconscious that every time it hears that sound, even though this other part of the subconscious says, we're doing a great job keeping you untense by giving you this soothing feeling and having you clench, this other part of your subconscious will say, but I'm hearing that sound, and that means that I'm going to hurt when I wake up in the morning. That means that my teeth are going to crack, or I'm going to need root canals, or I'm going to get a migraine, or all these different things that happen from clenching. So if you stick with the process, and it isn't trivial for most people, there are occasional people for whom it seems to be trivial. They're very lucky. But for 75% of the people for whom it works, it isn't trivial. But you stick with the process and you build up that second part of the subconscious over a period of several weeks, then it will start to take over. And it will say, no, find another way to soothe. Let go of the dream, or dream a different dream. There's got to be another way to soothe yourself in this miserable dream and have this clenching. And so in that way, it's attacking the root of the problem rather than just treating a symptom. Like if you put a mouth guard in, yeah, that'll keep you from breaking your teeth, but it doesn't stop the clenching. And most people clench even more on a mouth guard. So if migraines is your main TMJ problem, the mouth guard will make them worse. Or if cracked teeth was your only TMJ problem, the mouth guard might be a good solution for you. If pain in your muscles is your main TMJ problem, the mouth guard is going to make it worse. So it depends on what your particular symptom was from the clenching or how it's causing more damage for you, whether you would want to choose to do the biofeedback. But the nice thing is it's going after the root of the problem instead of all the symptoms.
Do you have to wear this your entire life, or is it just a period of time and then you can stop?
Most people, if they stick with it long enough, most people can completely train themselves out of the habit so they don't need to wear it anymore.
So long enough is what? Is that a year, 2 years?
3 or 4 months usually.
3 or 4 months, okay.
The fastest I've ever seen anyone do it was within a month, and I've seen people take half a year when they really stick with it. But if you only wear it when you're hurting, which is what most people do, so they wear it for a couple of weeks and it's, well, my pain's gone. I'm not getting migraines anymore. Everything is good. I'm going to stick this thing in a drawer because it's a pain in the ass to put it on my head every night. So then in another couple of weeks, their habit comes back and they wear it again for a while, and then their habit...
Right, so it doesn't really fix it.
If you do it symptomatically that way, you'll be at it forever.
Right.
And it takes a different level of discipline to do it for 6 months when you haven't had any pain for 4 of those months. Yeah.
Interesting. So where do you get it? It's like sleepguard.com? Is that
mysleepguard.com is the website for the biofeedback headband. Yeah.
Okay, mysleepguard.com. Got it. And what about all your other stuff?
The old website address still works also is stopgrinding.com. That's easier for some people to remember.
Okay, stopgrinding.
Sorry, what were you asking me?
Yeah, and where should we send our listeners who want to follow you, read some of your papers and articles and so forth? Where can we send them?
Well, actually, if anybody has any questions for me and they go to mysleepguard.com, there's a little message box, a ask a question box on every page of the website.
Yeah.
So you can contact me that way, and then I'll email back to you. And I also want to say, I don't know how big your audience is. If anybody wants to send me a mask to test, for the next couple of weeks, I will, at no charge, test any mask that somebody sends me along with an email address. I'll email you back the results.
Oh, that's very generous of you.
And I'm curious how many I'm going to get, but I'm willing to put up with it for a couple of weeks. And so the other thing is, if you want the mask back, then send me an envelope that's already got the postage on it, or you can PayPal me $5 and I'll mail the mask back to you. But most of the masks cost less than that, so most people probably, they bought them in a 10-pack or whatever, so they're probably perfectly willing to have me chuck it. But I want people to be safe. And I also want to figure out who's selling the fake masks. So when you send me a mask, tell me in a note where you bought it. All right. And then what I'll do is I'll build up a website, which I've started now, but I haven't put it online, that's going to have a list of who's selling fake stuff and who's selling real stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lee. It was a real pleasure. And thank you, listeners. Now get out there and help make this world a safer place.